2 weeks ago, I began a shiur where I began to talk about the stages of the Geulah, if you recall. But since it's 2 weeks ago, I think I really just have to recap in a short way the ideas of 2 weeks ago, And I mentioned that I started off with the concept that from the Pasuk in the Torah, God says that even if your outcasts be at the ends of heaven, from there I will gather you, yikabetzcho, and from there I will take you. And those are two very important terms. The kibbutz, which is the gathering, and the kicho, which is to take the Jews to God. Very important ideas. And they really constitute two of the steps or the stages of the entire messianic process. And therefore it's very important to take a look at these two terms, and also, what are all the different stages of the Geulah itself. And I had mentioned also that there are different dimensions of reality. And I mentioned very briefly, there is the reality of God, the Rabbi Shalom himself. And then he created what's called a zulato, which means an other, the neshama, and that's an other. And those two realities are the greatest of all. Then after that, God created what's called the ruchni reality, the spiritual reality, which basically consists of angels. And the purpose of angels is to allow an intermediary to do things, because God, the Rabbi Shalom, does not want to do them directly, because it would involve, therefore, in him, in a certain sense, having to do things where he does not want to be in any way detected, you see. So he created an entire realm of agents, you see, emissaries, and they do his will. And that is the concept of Ruchni, of the spiritual realm. And that's what these malachim do. They are agents that carry out the will of God. But they are of a completely different nature than we. Now, besides that dimension, which is the third dimension, I mentioned that there's a fourth dimension called Geshem, which is materiality. You see, the physical world. And that's a fourth reality which God created, okay? And in that reality, God created physical things, the whole universe and all the species and so on. But one of the things that he made, which is very unusual, is he took the neshama, the zulato reality, and he combined it with the physical. Therefore, what happens is you have a physical reality combined with the neshama, and that's what a man is. You see, he has a divine soul, neshama, and he has a physical body. Now, the purpose of the physical is basically to serve as a barrier for that individual to realize that that the real reality is not physical, but it is spiritual, you see. And that's his situation, so he can be tested. Will he recognize that the physical world really is not the real reality, ultimately, at all, you see, but it's really just a reality that serves to cloak or conceal the real reality of the spiritual. And that is man's task, to see through the illusion of a physical reality. And this is the way it was supposed to be. And that's what man's task was. And therefore, Adam HaRishon, basically, his task was to see through that reality, you see. But what Adam did, instead of seeing that the reality is the reality of the spiritual dimension, he failed. He and his wife, Chava, failed to understand the whole concept of a spiritual reality, you see. And therefore what he did is he sinned. And of course he ate from the tree of knowing good and evil. He sinned. And therefore he introduced a fifth reality, and that is the reality of the Satan, or as also known as the Sitra Achra, which means the other side. And that is reality, as I said, of the Satan. And Adam Rishon, even though the reality of the Sitra Achra, which is a Satan, was created at the beginning in potential, but not as an actuality. And it would take a sin of Adam to actualize the world of Satan and his involvement in the physical world. Therefore, Adam Rishon changed the nature, really, the nature of the physical task that man has. Until now, the task of man was to draw down the tremendous divine flow, the Kedusha, that divine energy, to turn it, bring it down, and as a result, physical reality would now retransform into a higher reality, because initially that's how things were created. God created the world of Zulato, which is the world of the Neshamot, and that is Olam Haba, the future world. And then what he did is he lowered the energy of that system, which is the future world, which Kabbalistically is called primordial man. He lowered that, and it became a physical reality, you see. And the highest of the realities, other than Olam Haba, is called Atzilut. Below that is Bria. Below the Atzilut is the reality near God. That's why it's called Atzilut, or the world of emanation. You have the world of Bria, which is the world of creation. And then you have the world of Yetzirah, which is formation. And then, of course, you have Asiya, which is the world of action. So God really did, what he did is he created those realities, you see. And the purpose of Adam, really, initially, was to bring down those forces, tremendous forces, divine energies of the things called the 10 Sefirot, divine energies, and retransform the physical world back into the spiritual, and ultimately even that back into the future world, you see. This is what Adam was supposed to do. Instead, he made it much worse, because he sinned, right? Therefore, he gave a place, some type of existential state to the Satan, you see. And the Satan really is connected to the physical world. So therefore, Adam, in a certain sense, became tremendously physical. And as a result of that, he is now governed not just by a physical reality, but also by a satanic reality. That is the world of the Sitra Achra. So therefore, as a result of that, basically, man's job is not now to retransform a physical world into a spiritual, and so on, until you get to the future world. Man now has to deal with the reality that he created, and therefore he must annihilate, you see, or eradicate the world of the Satan. Then what he must do is he therefore has to retransform the physical world, which is then left over after the annihilation, termination of the Satan and his world. Then he has to change the physical world into a spiritual. So Adam Harishon, or Adam Harishon, what he did is that he created a new task, which before that had never been. Now this task, therefore, becomes the major task of us, of mankind, especially the Jewish people. And that is to remove the Zoyamah, to allow us, therefore, to take Geshem and turn that into spirituality. Now that is ultimately what does happen. The world of the Mashiach, the Messianic age, really is an age, ultimately, where there is no more Satan, there's no more Sitra Achra, there is no more other side, you see, and there's no more what's called Zoyamah, which is that energy that the Satan can give out and controls everything. This is annihilated. It's removed. And the only reality then, in the time of the Mashiach, and Mashiach, I mean specifically Mashiach ben David, the Davidic Messiah, that reality is a reality of pure Geshem, and there is not even a trace of the Satan. And then from there, once the Messianic era is over, which happens in the year 2240, which is the Hebrew year 6000, then the divine energies come down and they begin to change the physical universe into the higher spiritual worlds. The physical universe changes into Yetzirah, which changes into Bria. It's going backwards into Atzilus, and then ultimately into Olam Haba. This is basically the game plan. However, because of Adam Harishon's sin, as I said, he created a new reality. And that reality is the world of the Zoyama, the energy that the Satan projects. And therefore, in order to get rid of that, you have to contend with the Satan. That's how you get rid of that. Now, I also had mentioned something very important, and that is that what energizes Satan? Well, what energizes him and his world is the same thing that energizes mankind, specifically the Jewish people. When a Jew does a mitzvah, there descends a tremendous divine energy, you see. And it goes to the Jew, and after a while, if all the Jews do all the mitzvot, that all that divine energy, right, comes down to him. And he becomes a tremendous person. Lives long, doesn't get sick, always has a parnasa, everything is great. However, if the Jew sins, then what happens is that divine energy, instead of going to him, it goes to the Satan. This is what happens. The Satan is energized, and therefore he now has what's called dominion, shlita, over the Jew, mankind. And all kinds of terrible things result because of this, you see. So the job of the Jew is really to take back whatever energy the Satan has as a result of the sins of the Jews, you see, to take it back into the side of holiness. And then that will mean that the Satan is now emptied of all the Kedusha. In Kabbalah, it's called the sparks of holiness, right? And he will be emptied of that, and he, of course, will collapse. The Zoyama will disintegrate, and he, of course, will be annihilated. And therefore, all the energy now in its right place will now retransform creation, as I said, to retrogress the creation all the way back to the future world, which was the first thing created. This is the task of man. Now, the only way he can do it, however, like I said, he has to be able to take back the energy that the Satan has as a result of the sins of the Jewish people. This is the way it works. Therefore, we are involved in that task. Now, from that, we can begin to recognize that there are really 7 different stages, which I had mentioned. And these are very important stages, you see. So we know what the overall idea is. But these stages really, in many ways, are specifically dealing with the Satan. Because once you annihilate the Satan, that is the Messianic era, you see. Now, what are the 7 stages? So, as we will see, the first stage is, in many ways, that the Jews have to consolidate their spirituality, make sure they have it, and to strengthen themselves. What is called the future test. Remember, the emphasis is to drain all the Kedusha from the Satan, and then to bring down the rest to try to change the world. So the first stage is what's called the consolidation, and they strengthen themselves in ruchnius, in spirituality. Then what happens is they need to enter. You see, they need to enter an environment that has tremendous amount of temptations to sin. And they have to remain non-assimilated, gerim, you see. And if they remain not assimilated, means they don't fall into the trap of sinning in that civilization, then they are able to take out all the energy, the divine energy that the Satan has. So we could look at that as stage number 2, you see. Now, what happens, however, if they begin to assimilate, if they begin to fall, then they go to what's called a third stage, and that stage is where, well, if you don't remain gerim, which means not a part of that civilization, and you begin to sin, you see, then 2 things will happen. So that's stage 3. So the first part of that stage is that you will they will dominate you. You see, you will be under their shlita, under their domination, which of course is the beginning of golus. So as a result of that, they will dominate you, and that will cause you a tremendous amount of anguish. And that suffering itself will begin to take away a great deal of energy from the Satan. Now, what happens, however, if you cannot withstand their domination and you begin to sin, then you will suffer much worse. Not only will they dominate you, but they will also persecute you, you see, and perhaps even kill you. Really make it terribly bad. And that's where golus becomes very, very dark. Again, all of it, however, remember, is whether it be that you remain, you don't assimilate, and you remain righteous. That's the key, right? Then that, however, what happens if you begin to assimilate? Then the domination and the suffering will also withdraw a tremendous amount of Kiddusha from the hands of the Satan, you see. And as a result of all of that, which is the real understanding of golus, you will have emptied the coffers of the Satan, of all the divine energy, and then he will be annihilated. Stage 4 is after this work, right, which is the stage of you being dominated and suffering from an evil civilization. Begins what's called a kibbutz. Kibbutz means to gather. So what happens is that people are separated. The Jews will be separated from the nation that they are in, and they will be gathered together, you see. And the chief way of doing that, really, is that the Jews will be elevated in terms of the Torah, in terms of the divine word of the Rabbi Shalom himself. But that's a 4th stage of Geula, and that proceeds after the Galut, that they will slowly begin to be separated from the nations of the world, and they will be gathered, you see. A 5th stage is where they have to be elevated. Not only do they have to be gathered, separated and gathered together, which is the beginning of the redemption, they have to be removed, and they have to now make their way back to holiness. That's the kicho. So those 2 ideas where God says, I will gather you, right? That really is the 4th stage of redemption. And then when it says, yikochecho, that God will take you, that is the 5th stage, right? Where you will now begin to come closer to God. And that is a stage of tremendous infusion of holiness. Then you have stage number 6, which is a stage where you now become very, very close to the Shekhinah, which is the divine presence, you see. And then number 7 is that once that happens, we are looking at Geula, the redemption. Okay, there you have it. You have 7 stages. Now, we see this. Now remember, the key concept to keep in mind is that this avodah, you see, of these stages really is the phases that are involved in the destruction of the Satan, to remove the Zoyamo and to restore the original task, which was the original task of Adam Arishon, and that is to change physicality into spirituality, you see. And therefore, that is the order of things. So we see from these stages that the main concept in many ways is the battle between the Jew and the Satan. And then the second stage, right, can begin. Now, where do we see this? Because that's the part of the secret meaning of the conversation that the Ribono Shel Olam, God, had with Avraham Avinu. You see, what God told of Avraham Avinu in Bereshit, in the Perek 15, which is the Bris Ben Absarim, the covenant between the pieces, he made an agreement, a covenant with Avraham Avinu, you see. And he told Avraham Avinu that your children, they will now take over what's called the tikkun of the Bria, the rectification of creation. Remember, the first stage of rectification is to destroy the Satan. And then after you destroy the Satan, then the second stage of rectification, of course, is to begin to change the world from a physical world to a spiritual, you see. In fact, that's what's stated in the two statements. Sumera, turn away from evil, right? It means you must detach evil from yourself. And then, Asay Tov, do good. Those are the two stages, which is part of the entire tikkun process. And that's what God told Avraham Avinu, you see. He told Avraham Avinu, you see, that Geye Zeracha, Be'eret Hashem Lo Elohem, and they will be Gerim, they will not be part of the nation, even though they'll be in the midst of the nation, in a land that they don't know, you see. And that is what I said is the second stage, where they will be thrust into a nation they don't know, which at that time happened to be Egypt, right? But their job is to remain independent of Egypt, the culture of Egypt, the sinfulness of Egypt. What happens if they don't? Then avodim, va'avodim, then the Jews will serve these masters. And that's the domination. And what happens if they continue to sin? Then ve'inu oisam. Then this nation that they are in, instead of, remaining righteous, they will have sinned. So therefore, that nation, besides dominating them, will also begin to persecute them. So what the Ribono Shel Olam has done, actually, is an outline for us what the journey is of the Jewish people in terms of the goal of destroying the Satan. It's a very important concept in Hashkafa, that the pasuk itself, the discussion that God had with Avraham Avinu, reveals the journey that the Jews, or the stages that the Jews have to go through. Now, all of these things, of course, like I mentioned, happen in Egypt. Okay? The first stage is where they have to consolidate and strengthen themselves in spirituality, ruchnius. That was when the Jewish people became a Jewish people after the Bris Ben Absarim, right? You had Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, right? They were not in exile. You had them, then you have Yaakov, of course, with the 12 Shvatim, right? So they were not part of Egypt in the beginning. So they can consolidate their energy and all the ruchnius to prepare for the real task, which is to enter Egypt, which is what they did. Now in Egypt it says, right? They were supposed to remain righteous, notwithstanding all the enormous temptations of the Satan. That's what they were supposed to do, you see. But they didn't. So they entered what is called the third stage. So the fact that they were supposed to be righteous, that's the second stage. All three destroyed the Satan. But they didn't do that. So therefore, they went into the third stage, right? But what we know is that the Egyptians now began to dominate them and also inflict on them tremendous amount of suffering. For Inu Isam. And that especially happened, the suffering, when Miriam was born. In fact, that's why Miriam was called Miriam, from the word mar, bitter. So for the last, whatever it was, 80-something years, right, the Jews suffered terribly at the hands of the Egyptians. Now, all of that, remember, is for the purpose of taking out all the holiness, the Satan from the Satan, all the sparks of holiness that he uses to energize himself. And all of that, you see, was to take out those sparks of holiness, divine energy, from the Satan. You see that, and that's exactly what happened. Then, once they finished that job, and that job is the main job, right? Stage 2 and stage 3, you could begin what's called the kibbutz. And that's where Moshe Rabbeinu came, like I said, and began to gather them, separate them from the Egyptians. And, of course, he gathered them, you see. That's the kibbutz. And the main way the kibbutz happens, you should know, is the concept of Torah. Now, even though the Torah was not given then, but every makkah really was Torah. Because every makkah, besides punishing the Egyptians, had tremendous revelations. And the Hasaga, the revelations of God, is the Torah. But it was in the form of the Makot. 10 Makot, 10 Sefirot, which the Jews had a tremendous understanding of, you see. So that was what's called the kibbutz, through the Torah in the form of the Makot. Now, once that happened, then you have what's called the Ticho, right? And those are the 49 days of the Sefira, which we are involved in. You see, the Sefira is really the Ticho, which is stage number 5. When they went from being in the Memtes Shari Tumah, the 49 levels of contamination, impurity, and they went up 49 days. They were able to remove the Memtes Shari Tumah, the 49 levels of defilement, from 49 days, and then they stood at Har Sinai, right, to receive the Torah. So that is the equivalent of the Kicho. And we are in these days of Sefira, right? Yes. Now, this, of course, was a tremendous aliyah in Kedusha, a tremendous ascent in holiness. And that's really what the Kicha is, where God says, even if they be at the ends of heaven, I will gather them, right? And I will take them to me, which is the ascent in Kedusha to get close to God. Then you have stage number 6, which is the reintegration or the connection, right, between the divine presence and the Jewish people. That is called the Shekhinah. So the Jews actually unite with God in that embrace. And that, of course, is messianic. Because from then on, what you have is the Mashiach, Ben David, you see, because Mashiach Ben Yosef is going to be involved in stage 4, the kibbutz, stage 5, the kicho, you see. But stage 6, which is the dvekus, where the Jewish people get together with God, that is stage 6, and that is really the stage of Mashiach Ben David. And then, of course, you will have 7, which, of course, is the ultimate redemption, and then that includes, of course, what's called Zikuch HaGuf, the purification of the physical universe, and that begins the entire removal of Olam Hazeh, you see. So that's it. And that's exactly what happened in Egypt, those stages. You see? So we now understand what the days of Sefira really is. Stage number 5, right? And the days of Sefira is when the Jews now get closer and closer to God himself. Now, when you think about that, that's called the first phase. It was an entire attempt to do what? For the Jews to usher in the Messianic era. However, it went what's called awry. Something happened, and that is, of course, two things: the chet egel, the sin of the golden calf, and the meraglim, the spies. You see, and that destroyed the ability of the Jews to destroy the Satan. So even though they had taken out all the energy of the Satan, and the Gemara says that when they stood at Har Sinai, nifsika zoyama shel nochosh, that the zoyama of the nochosh, of the snake, right, was nifsika, was interrupted. It stopped, you see. And therefore, the last thing that they had to do was to destroy the Satan. Had they not done the Chet Egel, what would have happened? Then the Satan would have died, because they would have extracted all the sparks of holiness. Very important idea. And that's what they did, you see. They took it out. However, because they did the Chet Egel, it was restored, a great deal of it, not all of it, but a great deal of it was restored to the Satan, you see. So that was the first attempt of the Jews to destroy the Satan and to initiate the whole concept of the Messianic age. And now Moshe Rabbeinu, he was supposed to be the Mashiach ben Yosef, because he's the one that does this, you see. So that was the first phase, or the first attempt to destroy the Satan and move on with the rest of the Messianic process. Almost happened. So what the Rebbe Hashem has to do is start all over again, because they now restored a great deal of the Zoyama into the Satan. So, believe it or not, you have all these stages coming up again, which I will now identify. And that really is an understanding of the whole Jewish history, these 7 stages. Let's take a look at stage 1. What is stage 1? Well, that's where the Jewish people, again, have to strengthen themselves, right? Strengthen themselves, consolidate all the spirituality. And that was done in the days of Yehoshua, right? Yehoshua. Then you had Shoftim, all the judges in Israel. You had Shmuel HaNovi, you had David HaMelech, and you had Shlomo HaMelech. You see, the Jews were in their own land, consolidating their ruchnias, and strengthening themselves for an entry, you see, into another civilization. So this is the first stage, the consolidation, as I said, for the Jews to strengthen themselves in ruchnias, in spirituality, in Eretz Yisrael. However, what is important is there was a change. Yerovim ben Nevat, who split Israel. You had, of course, the concept of Yehuda, right? And you had the concept of Yisrael. And they split. After Shlomo Melech, there was a king, his son Rechavam, you see, and the people of Israel rebelled against him because he was very excessively strict. He raised their taxes and so on. And finally, Yerovim ben Nevat, who was an incredible person initially, he led a rebellion against Rechavam, the son of Shlomo, and he split the kingdom. That's what happened. Now, what is interesting is that Yerovim ben Nevat almost became the Mashiach ben Yosef. The Ramchal says that Yerovim ben Nevat was the closest person to ever get the Yechidah, that aspect of the Neshama of the Mashiach. That's how great he was, Yerovim ben Nevat. We have no understanding of this man's greatness initially, you see. But what happened is obviously gaiva, arrogance, haughtiness overtook him. And he wanted to be, of course, the main guy. So what happened is he split the kingdom between Yisrael and Yehuda, and he went away and he constructed idols, and he turned away the Jewish people from the Torah itself, which is a terrible thing, obviously, because if he is so close to being Mashiach ben Yosef, what you're really seeing is the Mashiach ben Yosef himself being contaminated, right, with tremendous amount of sin. So what happens is the Jews are in Eretz Yisrael, in their own country, right, and they are now subjected to a civilization which is their own, which is Yerovam ben Nevat, who's really part of the era of Rabbi, even though he's the closest person ever to become Mashiach ben Yosef, you see. So even though he contaminated what's called the whole Mashiachos, and for that it was really terrible later on, what he provided the Jews is that they have to remain righteous, you see. So therefore, that was a second stage of redemption, you see. However, the Jews sinned tremendously to the extent, right, that the kingdom of Israel ultimately was destroyed. And this time, they entered a stage where they would be persecuted, but not by the Jews. That was the Churban, right? You had the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians, Nebuchadnezzar. So that began the tremendous domination of the nation of Babylon, which was the greatest nation then. So the Jews now began to go into what is called stage 3, you see, stage 3, which is a tremendous domination. But they continued to sin. This was the problem, you see. And then eventually after that you had Achashverosh and Haman. So it went from a foreign nation, originally was Babylon, which dominated the Jews. It went to a nation which now wanted to kill the Jews, and that was Haman and Achashverosh. And that is the suffering. Could you imagine the suffering that they had for a whole period of time, a year, with the threat that the Persians would kill the Jews, you see? So that we're looking at is a stage 3, where the Jews are now in a foreign nation, being tremendous suffering under that foreign nation, because we know they assimilated, in the sense that they joined Achashverosh at the meal that he made. And the Chazal tell us that this was the trigger for the entire destruction that Haman wanted to do, you see. Therefore, they suffered greatly, and they did tshuva, all of them. Like it says, Kimu v'kiblu, that on Purim they accepted with love that which they accepted before, which is Torah Shabbat Bet. They re-accepted it. They did the incredible tshuva, you see. So therefore, they could be released from that stage of suffering under a nation. And who would start a stage 4, which is the kibbutz? That was Ezra. Ezra comes right after Haman. In fact, Cyrus, who is either the son, I think he's the son of Ahasuerus and Esther, he gave them permission to go back. So therefore, they had, again, in many ways, did the tikkun, you see. And as a result of that, they could now enter what's called stage 4, which is the kibbutz. And the one who would do that is Ezra. Ezra, and of course, and Nehemiah, to do the kibbutz, which is what they began to do. You see, we see the same cycle of stages happening a second time, you see. Now, who is Ezra? The Gemara says that Ezra was so great that Ezra was a person that if the Torah wasn't given by Moshe Rabbeinu, it could have been given by Ezra. Ezra was Mashiach ben Yosef, you see, before he became Mashiach. That's how great he was. And he brought the Jews back. That's the kibbutz. And he began to teach them Torah. He began to elevate them, you see. And then, of course, they built the Beis HaMikdash, the second Beis HaMikdash, which, of course, is the beginning of the Kicha, which is stage number 5. Isn't that interesting? We see the repeat of these stages. But what was the problem? The problem was that only 70,000 Jews came back with Ezra. It means the overwhelming majority of the Jewish people did not come back with Ezra. Instead, they stayed basically, in Babylon and so on, Persia, whatever, you see. And they didn't come back with Ezra to Eretz Yisrael. And therefore that attempt to again bring the Mashiach was foiled because only 70,000 people came with him. And of course, therefore, since they didn't come back with Ezra, right, they would remain in those countries, Persia, whatever, Babylon, whatever, and of course they would continue sinning. So therefore the whole thing has to start all over again. It's incredible that they actually reached the stage 4, which is the kibbutz, and the stage 5, which is the ticho. It all had to go back basically to the early stages to again try to extract the Satan, you see. Now, we continue because they all had to go back to a stage 2, and which is the Jews would have to remain righteous, even though they're among the nations of the world. Then all of a sudden, who appears? Yovan, Greece, Hellenism, right? Which is the whole concept of Greek culture. So that is stage 2, where you are now involved in a foreign civilization, and they're trying to influence you to sin, to become a Hellenist, you see, to adapt the Greek culture. And that's what they tried. And of course, ultimately, Montesiori Kohen Gadol fought them with his sons and many other people, right, to destroy them, and they restored the Beit HaMikdash. So in a certain sense, they were successful in that they restored Judaism, righteousness. But the interesting thing about it that there was an enormous amount of people that were Misyavnim. These are the people that became Greeks. These are Jews. An enormous amount of Jews adapted Hellenism, Greek culture. That's what happened. Even though that's not really reported as much, but in many ways, enormous amount of Jews adapted the Greek culture. You see, so that would mean that the Satan still holds on to what? The Satan still holds on to his Kedusha, to all the sparks of holiness. So now we go to stage 2, or rather stage 3, which is that the Goyim, right, even though there are only Jews there, that there would be tremendous amount of wars, strife, and suffering, right, after the Greeks leave. And this, of course, would be introduced by, like I say, wars and tremendous amount of hardship, and also by Herod, who made tremendous amount of Jews suffer. And finally, it goes from that stage 3 to stage 3B, not A, and that is Rome. Finally, God says, enough is enough. What I have to do is now begin the suffering of the Jewish people, just like they suffered in Egypt, to remove the Kedusha from the Satan. They now have to suffer in Rome, which of course is Edom, you see. And we have been involved in that for 2,000 years in order to again destroy the Satan. That is what's been happening, you see. So in many ways, we are at the end of stage 3, which is we have suffered an enormous amount in the Galut, in Golus, you see, in order to destroy the Satan. And what's interesting is that really we are at the end of this stage, that the kibbutz, in a certain sense, has to begin. And the concept of a kibbutz is very important, you see, because it means that before God can bring the Mashiach, or perhaps at the same time, he has to separate the Jews from the Klippa, from the nation called Edom, which is really equivalent to Western civilization. He has to separate them. Therefore, ultimately speaking, something has to happen which will begin to separate the Jews and gather them together. And that has to come through a reawakening consciousness about the Torah. There has to be something that will occur that will bring the Jews back, get them to return again to God and His Torah. And that is where we are at. We are right before that, you see. And that is what we are experiencing. And that's really basically the stage we're at. We are ending stage 3, the suffering, and we are right before stage 4, which is the kibbutz. And listen, God has promised, swore, that there will come a time when that will happen. And it says in the Midrash, very interestingly, that the miracles that God did in Egypt, which are the 10 makot, the 10 plagues, is nothing compared to the miracles that God will do to us, for us, you see, when we will enter the whole concept of kibbutz. Now, we don't know what that means, really. We cannot envision something like that. But the Marsham says that to one of the Nevi'im, you see, that the miracles at the end of time will be much greater than the miracles, you see, at Yetzias Mitzrayim. And that will be the end. We will have the Mashiach ben Yosef, who will begin to initiate the kibbutz, just like Moshe Rabbeinu began to initiate the kibbutz with the makot, you see. He also, the Mashiach ben Yosef, he will initiate the kibbutz. And then he will grow, and the Jewish people will grow in Kiddusha. Finally, what will happen is the Kicho will begin, and that is the Beit HaMikdash HaShlishi, where the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, on high in heaven, because we know there's a heavenly temple, when that will descend, yes, that itself will descend and become physical, you see, and the Shekhinah, which is on top of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies in heaven, because remember, the Beit HaMikdash in heaven also has the exact counterparts to the Beit HaMikdash, the Mato. So therefore, on the earth. So therefore, the divine presence, as it is manifest in heaven, of course, will actually descend together with the Beit HaMikdash in heaven, and that will become physicalized. And therefore, the Shekhinah in the heavenly Beit HaMikdash will descend, like I said, with the Beit HaMikdash and become physicalized. Will descend down here, and that will become a Beit HaMikdash physicalized with the same Shekhinah, divine presence, that exists above. And that is the Or Mashiach, you see, because that Shekhinah, remember, it's a heavenly divine presence, which means it has an unbelievable, its pronounced prominence is unbelievable. That actually will be together with the physical Beis HaMikdash, which was previously the heavenly Beis HaMikdash, that will grow and bring the Messianic light, which is beyond comprehension, what the revelations will be. So that's where we're standing, you see. The only unfortunate thing, which I had mentioned, is that because the Mashiach is coming when the Jews have descended into the 49th level of Egypt, 49th level of Tumah, which is what the Jews had experienced in Egypt, the problem is that if that's the case, then justice has to be satisfied, because we don't really deserve that, because we're not at that level. Therefore, there will proceed, just like it did in Egypt, a tremendous period of darkness, you see. And that's really what we're witnessing. The world is falling apart as we watch it. And it's not just the world. The world is falling apart means that civilization is breaking down. Yes, we are watching a breakdown of civilization, of the laws of morality. Nothing makes sense in terms of America and even in Israel. None of this makes sense. And that is the breakdown that we are watching. You see, in order to bring the Jews up to the measure of justice that they have to accomplish, then the kibbutz can begin. So I'm sure that the kibbutz will begin shortly, and that this darkness that has to bring the Jews to a level where justice is satisfied, you see, hopefully that will be coming now. It will be ending now. This system of to bring the Jews to satisfaction of justice, and the kibbutz will begin very, very shortly. And that's basically where we're at. You see, so I've covered the entire history of the Jewish people, basically, and what we see is that there are basically major phases. The first phase to destroy the Sultan, of course, was with Egypt, and that failed. The second phase was, of course, the whole concept of Ezra and so on, and that failed. And we are now in the continuation of that phase with Ezra, but the one who's taken over, of course, is Edom, Rome, America, Western civilization, and we are now experiencing the end of that. And one of the significant things of that, to show that it's ending, is that Trump became president, and in many ways he is part of a messianic process, which I had mentioned a long time ago, in order to change Edom, where Edom itself does tshuva, America does tshuva, but amazingly that itself is also disappearing, because we are now in the middle of the darkness, and so on. And hopefully that will end soon, and there will be a kibbutz, and all of this nightmare will terminate. Any questions?
Rabbi, how long does it take for the process of going from the physical and switching into the spiritual? How long is that whole process?
That process, when Mashiach will end his reign in the English year 2240, which is the year 6000, the world begins to change. What's called zikuch, the purification of a physical reality, begins to change. And it takes 3,000 years, because it changes from this world, Asiya, which is, at the end of that is the Messianic era. It changes, takes 1,000 years, and it changes to Yetzirah. Then it changes from Yetzirah another 1,000 years into what's called Bria. Then it takes another 1,000 years to go from Bria to Atzilus, and then the future world will begin in the year 9001, you see. But it doesn't make a difference. We have to be concerned. That's merely the changes. We have to be concerned mainly with the kibbutz. As far as we're concerned, that's what ends it all, because that's the entry of Mashiach ben Yosef. The time that it takes to go from a physical existence to the future world, that will take, after the Messianic era, 3,000 years. But it doesn't make a difference, because remember, the key concept with the entry of Mashiach ben David is the destruction of evil. You see? Where we will not even remember what evil was. Every characteristic of evil, sickness and death, poverty, suffering, all the mental illness, all of this will be gone, because all of these things are the manifestation of the Satan. You see? So it will take time to go from a physical universe to the future world. Now, the future world is even beyond the spiritual. Relative to us, Olam Haba, the future world, it seems to be spiritual. But Olam Haba is different than spirituality. Even the Malachim, the angels, cannot conceive of what the future world is. Nobody knows, because it is a reality that nobody has ever experienced at all. So therefore, it takes time, but like I said, the main thing we want to get to is the kibbutz, which is the separation and the gathering of the Jews away from the nations of the world. You see.
And you think that's going to happen soon?
I believe so. And I believe all of the things that we see, the tremendous darkness that we are watching now, the what's called the collapse of America and its values. Who would ever have thought that America would be going the way it is? With the Democratic Party and all the people and so on, the president. Who would ever imagine that America is headed to be communist and so on? And Israel obviously cannot put a government together. And there's a tremendous amount of corruption and Erev Rav in Israel. We are watching the collapse in many ways of civilization. This isn't just the removal of justice. The whole thing makes no sense. Who ever heard of defunding police? I mean, only a crazy lunatic could have come up with such an idea. Because without police, then crime is rampant. It's over with. What are you going to call? You call a social worker to stop the criminal. I mean, these people should have their heads examined. But the main idea is that we are watching the breakdown of civilization, you see. And as such, this is what the Torah, this is what it says in the Gemara. The Gemara has many statements that say that before Mashiach comes, you're going to have the breakdown of civilization. And it gives many different illustrations. Nobody's going to have any money. Nobody will respect any kind of seniority or authority or whatever. We're watching it, literally. And this is why, you see, because that is the darkness that has to precede the Messianic era in order to make the Jews, satisfy justice. So we really are in this mode, you see, and this type of darkness precedes the Mashiach. It's not part of civilization, really. We've never seen such a breakdown of civilization. When all America is concerned with gender, today, you can't say things because it's against gender. It's crazy. And, the whole concept of race also is completely irrational because America is not no systemic racism. How could you have a president like Obama becoming president if we were systemically racist? Obviously, all it is, it's a play for control. That's all it is. But without elaborating on that, because everybody knows, we are right before the kibbutz. If we were not, we would never have seen the success of these, the liberals and the Democratic Party. They would never have been successful if the period of darkness had not begun. So we're very close.
What's very close to you, Rabbi? Very close to me is like next month. Very close to you is like what, next year?
Well, it's a good question. I would imagine very close means within the year.
Within the year of
Pei Aleph. What?
Within the year of Tafshin Pei Aleph.
Yeah, or maybe, it's hard to say, but I would imagine within a year, even if it's Tafshin Pei Beis. Because how long can civilization like this last? You see, look, what's the Rebbeinu Shem going to do? He's going to wait 10 years, 20 years? There won't be any Jews left. We don't realize the Jews are disappearing en masse. In America, you have non-religious of Jews, 70% intermarry with Goyim. 70%. That means out of every 10 Jews, 7 of them are intermarried to a Goy. Well, how long could the Jews last under those circumstances? You see? And not only in Israel, 1.5 million kids are taught in their public school that pluralism, which means there are many forms of Judaism, and they're all okay, whether it be reformed or conservative or whatever. How long could that last? This is the entire youth of Israel. And nobody sits there, nobody cares. It's astounding what goes on in that government, So we're looking in many ways at the end of Israel, in that sense, as a religious country. And we are looking at the dissolution of America. And where America goes, everybody goes with it, you see. So you think about it. How long can this world last? So what's the Rebbe Shem going to do? Wait another 20 years when there's hardly any Jews left? Is that what he wants? Not likely. So I believe we are watching the end. You see. Any questions? Okay, that's great.
What can we do to prepare ourselves for Shavuot, Rabbi?
So can you repeat that question?
What do you recommend for Shavuot, being that it's next week, that we should do, that we should, focus on?
I would say
light of the Torah.
Focus on, that's good. I would say since Shavuot is when we receive the Torah, and what receiving the Torah is not just a document, it is that the Jews said, Na'aseh v'nishma. That's the key. Na'aseh means we will do, v'nishma, and then we will understand. That's called a commitment. That's really what happened at Matan Torah. The Jews committed themselves that they would observe the Torah, whether it be the written Torah, the oral law, and so on. That's the key of Torah. So Shavuot, just say to yourself, Na'aseh v'nishma, just like the Jews did in Achashverosh and Purim, the Na'aseh v'nishma, by Kimu v'Kiblu. You see? So I would say, if you can do that, you will have achieved an enormous greatness, where you will have rededicated yourself, redevoted yourself, and reaccepted God's kingdom on earth. And that basically is the Torah. And then, of course, you could learn Torah. That would be great. But the key is to accept the Torah itself. Na'aseh v'nishma, you see.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the major idea of Shavuot. You see. Well, listen, I've spelled out what is the entire process of Tikkun. You see? And I gave you the stages of Tikkun. And, I've tried to, clarify the different stages and then parallel them to the stages of Egypt and the stages after Egypt, right? Through all the different, the governments and countries that the Jews have gone into. And basically, within that scenario, where are we? And that's what I wanted to do, which is very important. You have a tremendous view of the whole Tikkun process. You see, very important idea to connect all the dots.
So I have a question, Rabbi.
Yes.
So we learned with you that now Yishmael is doing Teshuvah, and that's why Dubai and all those countries did peace treaties with Israel. But how do we explain what's going on in the Holy Land with them burning the Har HaBayit?
You mean the Arabs?
People. Yeah.
Well, part of the interesting idea is that Biden is destroying what's called the Abraham Accords. The reason why the Arabs are doing this, not only because the Ramadan is ending, but more importantly, because the PLO, the Arabs now see that America is now siding with the enemies of Israel, Iran, and he's also siding with the PLO. And they see that. That's why they probably think that they can get away with it, that America is going to tell Israel to restrain itself. That's probably why they did it, because they've never sent missiles or rockets to Jerusalem. Obviously, they think they can get away with it. Why? Because America is now siding with them, you see. And that, unfortunately, may change the whole concept of Abraham Accords, because they now, like Saudi Arabia, is now trying to cozy up to Iran, because they realize that America is behind Iran, you see. So, and before that, it was Trump, which held Israel in the highest esteem. So everybody wanted to be part of Israel. That was an incentive. But now that they see Biden, on the contrary, is again not that is concerned not with Israel. He's really against it in many ways. You see, and on the contrary, he's trying to make a deal with Iran at all costs, which is insane. So the Arabs are losing interest in many ways of joining with Israel. Therefore, Biden, the Democratic Party, the liberals, you see, what they are doing, the progressives, they are the darkness. They are satanic. And this is what has to happen before Mashiach comes. That's what you're really witnessing, you see.
Rabbi, as we're speaking, they're burning Bate Knesset and places of Limud
They're burning what? They're burning what?
Beit Knesset, synagogues, and places of learning of Torah in Israel, in Lod and in several other places in Israel.
Who is burning? The Arabs?
Yeah.
You mean they're setting fire to the Knesset?
Yeah. No, not the Knesset. The synagogue.
Yeah.
Sure.
Really? That's astounding. Yeah, that's the desperate attempt to make sure that the Israel will not succeed. This is what you're watching, is the strategy of the Satan, because he knows once the kibbutz starts, he's finished. It's over for him. So he is trying his best to re-agitate Edom, Esav, against the Jewish people, you see. And that's the problem, which I once gave a whole shiur about, the concept that, part of when justice has to be satisfied, what that also means is justice, I should say evil, has to dominate. Because he's saying, hey, take a look, what are the Jews doing? They don't learn, they don't do mitzvot. All they're trying to do is copy the goyim, assimilate, why should you protect them? So justice demands justice. And that's what's happening, you see. You are watching, in a certain sense, although it's not exactly that, you are watching the war of Gog against the Jewish people. Because that is the end of the Satan, you see. And you're watching all these political forces to destroy America, to destroy morality, to destroy the whole concept of a normal civilization, cancel culture. You're watching a tremendous, what's called mahapecha, overthrow of civilization. And in Israel, it's the same thing, you see. They want to undo that which Trump did. Jerusalem is a capital, the Golan, you see. And not only that, Israel has made terrible mistakes. They should have annexed the territories. That was more important. Netanyahu made a terrible mistake. He's a fool, I have to say this, because he did not take advantage of the fact that Trump loves Israel. He should have done all of this when Trump was president, because Trump would have backed him all the way. Instead, what does he do? He folds, right, to people that said, well, let's do the UAE, the United Arab Emirates and so on. Yeah, that's nice. But what's much more important is to annex the territories, that they become part of Israel, you see? And now forget about it. Biden will never allow that. Nobody's going to allow that. So he wasted the opportunity of Trump, president, loving the Jewish people. An incredible, foolish move. That's what he did. And the Jews are now suffering, you see, because he's gone, and now nobody's going to allow them to annex the territories. And even the Arabs, you never know. They may pull out altogether, because what do they care now about Israel? America anyway is behind Iran. What they have to do is try to make friends with Iran, which is exactly what Saudi Arabia is trying to do, to remove the threat of Iran against itself, you see? Look, these are people that make terrible mistakes. The problem is that we look at these politicians as if they're larger than life, as if they know what they're talking about. Many of them, not all of them, many of them are absolute morons. Yeah, that's what they are. And they make terrible mistakes because they don't think in terms of what is good for the Jewish people. You know, with a lot of these people, it's all about glory, you see, power, recognition, honor, you see. But if they would think what's good for the Jewish people, then a lot of mistakes would have been avoided, you see. And now Israel is suffering because, of course, there's another president who's incredibly, this man is, you can't believe the evil of this man. That's assuming he knows what he's doing altogether. That's a big question mark because he's really senile. But he wants to go down in glory as being the greatest progressive president. That's what he's all about. He couldn't care less that he's destroying America by printing money as if there was no tomorrow, right? He's destroying the American economy. Yeah, of course. It may be rising now because he's just injected in everybody's pocket $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. Of course it's going to go up, But at what cost? He is printing dollar bills without any kind of reserve. It's unbelievable. That means America is going to go into unbelievable debt, and he's endangering the entire currency because America, the dollar, is the reserve currency of the entire world. He's endangering that because if you print too much money, then the dollar is worthless. Of course, nobody's thinking about that. So he is endangering the entire United States, and with that, he's endangering the entire world. Besides allowing Iran, who is one of the most evil country on the planet, to again, become a nuclear force, even though he says he's not, right? He's desperately wanted them to join with America. And as a result of that, Israel is in a very difficult position, you see. And listen, it's terrible what's happening. Like I say, this darkness, this breakdown of civilization must precede the coming of the Mashiach. As far as we're concerned, is the kibbutz. That's what we're waiting for, you see. Look, all of this is unusual. The fact that the Arabs have taken the chutzpah to bomb Jerusalem, which is unheard of, is because of Biden. Yeah. He's energized them. He's empowered them because they realize he's on their side. See?
He also sent them millions of dollars in aid.
Of course. What is that? $240 million, which you should know is illegal because there's a thing called the Taylor Act that as long as they sponsor people to kill Jews, it is illegal to give money to them. He doesn't care. Did anybody mention this in the Congress, that you're not allowed to do this? That it's a crime? You're violating American law? Of course not. I mean, you cannot believe. I just see one thing, which is we have no concept. Someday God will say, enough is enough, right? And all of a sudden bring the entire world into judgment. They have no concept of what will happen to them when they stand in front of God being judged. For the evil that they've done to Jews, to the entire world, that they've made the entire world immoral. It's all about their own power and glory. Look, God doesn't forget anything. Every iota of evil that they've done will come back to them, to haunt them and to punish them severely. In a certain sense, I feel sorry for all of them, and especially what they've done to the Jewish people. And they know what the Torah says, who the Jews are. I mean, how many times does it say in the Torah, that God loves the Jews and that, they will inherit the land? What does it say that, like that 500 times and so on? And they don't care. They do not fear God. They don't fear retribution. But I'm telling you, they have no concept when God finally gets on the seat of justice and begins to look at the world in terms of what they deserve, you will see an utter, terrible destruction of these nations and the people involved. That's what I can say. They're playing around with God. They have no idea who they're dealing with. I always use an example which I heard many years ago. Imagine you work for you're a wild game hunter, and you capture wild animals for a zoo, and of course they pay you very handsomely, right? So what do? You go to India where there are tigers, and you go and look around and so on, and then all of a sudden you're walking and you see a bunch of little cubs, little tigers, and you start to take them, put them in your pouch or whatever, you see, and the tigers are screaming and yelling because they realize that they're being kidnapped from their mother and so on, But you don't care. What do you care? You want to sell them for a rich profit, right? And then you put them all in the bag, like let's say all 4 or 5 of them, right? And then you turn around and you begin to retrace your steps, back to your car. And all of a sudden, you take a look and you see that there's a pair of eyes looking at you. Who's that? The mother tiger. And she's about 15 feet away from you, and you've got her cubs in your bag, stealing them, and they're screaming in the bag, right? And she looks at you with her eyes and begins to growl, and you realize that you're about to become her dinner. That's the story with the Goyim. When finally, they want to mess around with the Jews, okay, taking a chance. We are the cubs of God. We are the children of God. God says that in His Torah, that He loves us. Hu avicho, He's our Father. We are His cubs. And what did the Goyim do for us? They butchered the Jews for thousands of years. And we cannot even begin to understand the horror of what they have done to the Jewish people in all manner, not just killing, bankruptcies, and destroying the reputation and the businesses and so on. I'm not even going into the Holocaust and the expulsions, the Inquisitions, the Crusades, and so on. I'm not even going into the obvious forms of torture and so on, right? Okay, that's what they do. They are destroying the cubs of God, right? Because they think nothing's going to happen to them, right? Then all of a sudden, the day of judgment arrives, and God is revealed throughout the entire creation. And could you imagine what those Goyim are going to do? They will be horrified, because they're mortified, because they know what's about to happen. Because God doesn't need witnesses. His memory is total, you see. And they know what they've done. They know what they've done, you see. And they realize the gig's up. That's the tiger looking at the guy who stole her cubs. What do you think is going to happen to them? Well, what they're probably going to do is run to the Jews and beg them to forgive them for what they butchered them for 2,000 of years, more than that, 4,000 years. Ever since Avraham Avinu was thrown into Kibshon Ha'esh, right? They've been trying to destroy Jews, and they realized that. Could you imagine what, in that instant of time, when they realize that God is, and that the Jewish people are His children, and the Father is about to come and exact nekama, revenge, right? Imagine what they're going to think. Well, that's what's going to happen.
Crazy.
What was that?
It's going to be crazy.
Crazy is an understatement. You are going to see fear. You are going to see fear that you have never witnessed in your entire life. And it's not fear of one person, where everybody who has said anything against the Jews, forget about harming them or doing things which are evil and causing them to be killed or whatever, you have no idea what kind of fear is going to exist among the nations of the world. Believe me, you have no idea. But just think about the cubs and the tiger. It's a good example. What is this guy thinking when that tiger's looking at him 15 feet away and is growling, and the tiger sees that you've just stolen his cub, right? That's called dinner.
Rabbi, at what stage does that fear kick in?
Who? Goyim?
Yes.
As soon as the Mashiach ben Yosef reveals himself. Because that's it.
So this could be very soon.
That's in the kibbutz, right? That's in the kibbutz?
Yes. Yeah. In some way, he will be involved in the kibbutz process. Just like Moshe Rabbeinu. The process was really through him. The whole Makkos came through Mashiach ben Yosef. Same idea. This whole kibbutz, where the Jews are separated and gathered, right, and then elevated and taught, and so on, that's when it begins. And at that point in time, it will dawn on them what is happening, and that this is the truth, that there is a God, and there is a Messiah, and it is the Jews that he came to redeem. And they are all going to sit back and will look in horror, like I say, at what they know is about to happen.
So, Rabbi, on Shavuot with the Sefira, what happens on Shavuot with the Sefira? Like, what's happening at that time? So that I'm just curious what's happening then.
Well, what happens at then is that the Nitzotei Kedusha, the sparks of holiness, are all taken out of the Satan and given to the Jews, which means to given to the side of holiness. And that energizes Sefirot, all 10 of them, and they now generate that incredible Kedusha of which we cannot even imagine, that begins to change the world. And that, by the way, is the Makot of the Goyim. That's what the same thing happened by Egypt, where the Sefirot, they destroyed Egypt in a physical counterpart called the Makot. Same thing. They won't be the exact same thing like Dam and Tzfardeh and so on, but they will, whatever they are, they will be the manifestations of the 10 Sefirot, which are now completely restored to Kedusha. And that will destroy whoever it is meant to destroy. And that's on Shavuot, that's what happened. All of the energy went to the side of holiness and so on, you see.
So does that happen every Shavuot?
Yes, what happens every Shavuot is the potentiality of that happening happens.
So is that why instructed to study all night? Is that why we're instructed to study all night to gain
yes,
that?
Yes, because if we stay all night, if we stay up all night and learn, then what we are doing is preparing for that eventuality, which we hope will happen this Shavuot. Yeah.
Amen.
You see.
So even if Pesach already passed, and Shavuot,
even if what passed?
Passover.
Pesach.
Oh yeah,
passed,
okay, yeah.
And Shavuot is here, like because the 10 feet of Shavuot, when the Bnei Yisrael got the Torah, it has all that emanation, but us now in fast forward in our time, we didn't get what happened on Passover. So could we still gain what's from Shavuot? Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yes, sure, we can still gain. Because Pesach continues until Shavuot, you see. In fact, the manifestation in Shavuot of the 10 Sefirot, energized, restored, is what? Is the 10 Commandments. That's really what they are. The Aseret HaDibrot. That's what they are. Those are the 10 Sefirot now clothed in the commandments. You see? That's really what it is. And you can actually make a parallel. You see? If you want, you can just take one of them, where the first commandment is Anochi Hashem Elokecha. I am the Lord your God that took you out of Egypt. That is the parallel of Keter, crown. See, I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. I am the king. That's Keter. So that commandment, right, really is a manifestation of Keter. You see? So the 10 Commandments are really the 10 Sefirot, right, metamorphosized into commandments. So you have the Asura Mamarot, the world was created with 10 statements. That was, of course, the 10 Makot, and that really is the 10 Commandments. That is the parallel. You see?
So the Pekidah could technically happen on Shavuot because it's a continuation of Passover.
Yes, it could. Yes. In fact, it is the culmination of Pesach.